Welcome to the Winning E-Commerce Experience Show, where it's all about creating a brand that your customers love so they keep coming back. This show is brought to you by DataQ. Your store experience begins with your homepage. DataQ improves your conversion rate up to 30% by showing each visitor a personalized homepage based on their interest. And now, your host, Shahram Anver.
All right. Hey guys, our next guest is an entrepreneur who has successfully operated 3 8-figure direct-to-consumer companies. Kevin Gould, great to have you with us, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So you were just talking to me about how LA, you guys are just going to be wearing face masks now, right? So things are getting a bit crazy.
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting last month. I think not only for LA, but for obviously the entire world. I think the mayor of LA yesterday announced that the city, I think starting Friday, is everyone's required to wear face masks and going to businesses and grocery stores. And so it's sort of just kind of figuring out right now how to adjust to the new normal, at least for the foreseeable future. And I think with LA being a bigger city, it looks like this might happen for a good while.
Yeah. I mean, how's the traffic situation though? Hopefully at least that's gotten better.
Traffic's better than ever. I mean, look, I haven't owned a car for 5 years. I Uber full time.
So, virtual high five.
Yeah, I got rid of the whole driving thing about 5 years ago. So been taking a lot of walks lately, exploring the city. The air is cleaner than ever. So LA is generally not the best for air quality. So I guess on the positive side, that's a plus.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think everyone's talking about this thing with new normal, right? So yeah, on the positive side, you've got the whole environmental effects, cleaner air and all of that. But at least in the business world, it's fair to say that things have definitely changed. So maybe just let's start with thinking about what was your thought process? So when this thing hit you, at what point did you think, man, this is going to be big and what should I do? Maybe talk us through that process.
Totally. It's so interesting when you kind of think back over the course of the last couple of months and how everything progressed, because it obviously started with China and, other parts of the world. And that was, the first thought was, is this going to affect supply chain? Right. Mm-hmm. So I think brands were seeing that, certain brands were having their supply chain completely cut off, or you were seeing things like the number of flights per day getting cut down. And so the air freight was starting to rise. And there were issues that were affecting the US from a supply chain perspective, but it hadn't hit the consumer yet. It was more from sort of a business to business perspective, and it was affecting the back end of businesses. Then I think when we got into, early March, when we started seeing all the cases pop up in the US and the news sort of started covering a lot more, I think everyone generally started getting a little worried. And then, kind of thinking back to, I don't remember the exact date. It was March 9th and March 10th. I can't remember the day that, LA started to really go under lockdown, but it all happened so quickly. Yeah. I think everyone was just in shock. It was, and there were so many different, things that run through your head, right? Because as an entrepreneur, you're thinking about this one, with this in particular, thinking about the safety of yourself, your family. It's not just about business, it's about people, right? And then your second thought goes to, well, what about all of your employees and your team members and, making sure they're okay, because they're in the same boat and they're thinking about the same things from a personal level you are. And then your mind simultaneously starts jumping to the business and you're like, well, what does this mean for the business? And how are we going to quickly put a plan in place to deal with it? But it was moving so quickly. The assessment period for assessing what was happening got shortened so much, right? I think in 08 or 09 or any other time there's a recession, you sort of see it coming a little bit and you have a little bit of time to think about it and adapt. A week. Yeah. It was really, really tough. And it was this, as an entrepreneur, there's so many emotions you go through and you're thinking about, and you want to make the right decision for your team and their safety. And then you got to think about the business. And so It was like a whirlwind, man.
Yeah, it's like it kind of hits you in all the worst parts, right? It's like one, it's your health, which is literally the most important thing, and your
Right.
family, and it's your wallet as well. So it's like even if you manage to stay safe, how are you gonna take care of your livelihood? So it's and I guess that's that song and dance everyone's playing right now. Even at the government level, how long do we keep the economy in lockdown to keep people safe, or like how much do we let like open up quickly so that people can actually go out and make some money and eat?
Totally. And I think even from, I remember when we sort of made the announcement to the office, we were shutting down, even that, figuring out that plan had to happen so quickly. And honestly, we had, myself and my co-founder, we had the same questions everyone else had, right? So there
Right.
wasn't like a playbook to go by to figure out what was the best thing to do here. But I think we just kind of like rounded up everyone and, you know, let everyone know that we're going to be working from home. We have no idea how long this is going to last. You know, but I would prepare for this to last a long time, and really talk to everyone about how working together is more important than ever, because communication is so key when you're out of the office. And you know, we kind of let everyone know this is sort of like a new thing, and we're all going to have to work through it together. But most importantly, like, take care of your health first, take care of yourself. And then in parallel, we started thinking about, you know, what plan to put in place for the business while everyone was working from home.
So I guess, I mean, everyone's in the same situation. It's like you don't have much data to make a call, but it sounds like what you really should be doing is not to get paralyzed by that and just make decisions. Like, just do the best you can with the limited data you have. And obviously keep yourself open to change, but don't get it stuck in a limbo, right? Wondering what to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's no right answer to, again, there's no playbook, right?
Exactly.
So the biggest thing is don't get paralyzed by fear of being indecisive, and you have to make quick decisions on things. And in order to make quick decisions, I think we went through a very, very quick assessment process of just looking at all aspects of the business and trying to figure out where we were, you know, potentially, like where could we have potential issues, right? Like where were potential issues that could come up, and just assessing the overall situation and then making quick decisions from there, in terms of the health of the business and like how we needed to move forward.
I mean, so that I don't want to get too specific because obviously that's very like specific to your business, but are there any areas, you know, if someone's listening in and thinking, you know what, I've actually been stuck in a limbo, I don't know how to deal with this. So if you're going to be doing that kind of diagnostic, are there some like clear areas that you'd say, yes, like definitely start with these three areas of your business?
Totally. Yeah, and I think, again, to your point, it's specific to every business. We were fortunate in all of our brands on the brand side that we were never one of those companies that, you know, runs brands unprofitably, right? Like they may, early on, they may not make a lot of profit, but we were all about responsible growth all along. And so I think that really hedged us when this hit, because we didn't have to go do extreme cost cutting. We've kept everyone on the team. So everyone's still with the team. But for us, it was about, okay, like from an expense perspective, how can we quickly look at all of our expenses, whether they be, you know, SaaS services, you know, the sort of the operating expenses that we have, where can we potentially, you know, lean out, cut a little bit. And then from the marketing end, again, we, for the most part, from a marketing perspective, are not doing things that don't have a fairly direct attribution to them, or we can't trace back some sort of direct attribution, but really just like doubling down and making sure when it hit that we were being really smart about our marketing spend, and there wasn't anything going out the door that we knew wasn't tracing back to, you know, real revenue, right? And then I think like the last piece was just looking at like the overall like macro marketing, you know, like how we were marketing, right? And there had to be a complete reset, and that couldn't happen overnight. I'd say that took, you know, that took a week or two to recalibrate how we were marketing across each of the brands. And so that's normally a much longer process, but we kind of like rethought through that entire
funnel. That mostly like a messaging thing where you had to be more empathetic, so you couldn't just go out with a message you had, say, a week ago? or was there like more to it? Because that sounds really interesting that you did a reset.
I'd say both. Like from a messaging standpoint, there was a lot of thought going into how are we supposed to speak to our audience and consumers, right? And I think you have to remember that it's not just about selling a product. Like I think with us, like pre-corona, right? Like anytime you build a brand is only as good as like the community that's built behind it, right? And so on all three of our brands, my co-founders and I, we spent a ton of time like really cultivating the community. And I think there's like we just have an amazing relationship with the consumer. And so we have to remember that they're going through the exact same things we are. Right. And so what's like the right way to speak to the consumer going through that? And so that took a little while to work through. And then I'd say on the other end of things, on sort of the spend side, right? I'm sure a lot of other e-com brands saw this. We particularly saw this. Those first couple days when the lockdowns hit in the US, it got a little scary for a little while on the sales side, right? Like everyone was seeing their sales drop, everyone was seeing their ROAS drop on the ad side. We had to adjust really quickly, right? And kind of taking things week by week, and obviously it's improved since then, and we can talk about that a little bit. But those are sort of the main things we were looking at.
Yeah, I mean, so one feedback I heard, and I think it's a little bit harsh, but could be some grain of truth, that this pandemic is kind of showing up businesses who had their processes done right, or the ones like it's kind of amplifying mistakes you may have made before, which is now just so much worse. So, these heavily VC funded companies, which are just spending to high heaven without really a clear plan to profit. Well, that just got way worse because now you don't really know how long your runway is because you don't know when so it's really good to hear from you that like you guys were already pretty set on that front, right?
Totally. And personally, I mean, look, I do a lot of angel investing too. I don't personally understand what an e-com brand needs a bunch of money for, right? Funding wise, like if it's a high quality product, you've built a community around it, you may need a little bit of funding to get it up and running, right? Like we've self-funded all of our brands, and
like
it's
some ads maybe.
Yeah, it needed capital, you need to buy inventory, you need to think about marketing, and there's some expenses that go with that. But some of these brands that are going out and raising crazy amounts of money just to acquire a customer at such a high cost of acquisitions in the hopes that like they're going to back into an LTV that may or may not be there. I don't know. Me personally, everyone sort of has their own strategy on it. We, from the start, just thought about it a little bit differently. And we wanted the goal, and I have different co-founders on each of our brands, but the goal I think universally was when we start these brands, we have to get them profitable within 6 months or less. And if they're not, we kind of need to assess the business and figure out like, what are we doing wrong? Because again, the reality is there shouldn't be that much cost of capital outside of like financing inventory. We're financing obviously marketing, but you should only be doing marketing in the beginning if it's positive, right?
Sure, like you're attracting a customer.
So I don't know. That's my personal opinion. I don't know why everyone raised all this money, for e-com.
No, but listen, it's like it's one of those. Every time you have these big shifts, you've got people on different sides of many, many issues. And now it looks like things are really going heavily more towards people on your side of the fence who are like, why are people raising so much and spending stupid amounts of money to acquire customers, which don't give you the LTV sort of ROI versus maybe that other side. But, just coming back to this, this idea of somebody in this situation right now, let's maybe put them into these two buckets. So let's say that, if someone's already got their company running very lean, then I think it's clearly the other things which you were talking about, which is like, looking into your team, really looking at your marketing strategy and figuring out how do you adjust the customer acquisition to this new reality. Obviously cut some costs as well, but I don't think that's going to be that important. But somebody probably in a biggest problem, which is massive cash flow issues, I guess, would you say that should be the number one focus right now? Just stop everything you're doing. Look at where you're spending all that money and try to stretch that runway as much as you can.
Totally. I mean, one, I would have hoped they've done that already, or they might be, because 3 or 4 weeks is like an eternity, when you're burning a lot of cash. But yeah, I think like really the first step was just stepping back and getting like a real picture of where your finances are at. And depending on how the business is going or what category you're in, you're going to have to make some decisions. And I think, I think it's very category dependent. Some of these categories that just aren't, I wouldn't even, obviously the essentials are thriving right now, right? It's better than ever. Then there's sort of that other bucket of like, they're almost like the new essentials that are,
office stuff.
Yeah. And I think those are doing well. Then you've just got certain categories that are just down, right? Like I think apparel and some other things are just trending down because other than athleisure, right, that people are sitting at home all day, you don't necessarily need, there's certain categories you may not need right now. And I think everyone needs to respond to it a little bit differently. I think for categories that are down and it's, no fault of their own, it's just the current, environment, I think they really need to lean heavily into their dedicated customers, right? Like, I think it's probably hard and challenging for them to go acquire a lot of new customers right now. And get people to pull the trigger on a new purchase from a brand they may have never heard of when they're just generally not buying in that category at all. But for these brands that have built loyal followings and communities, I think it's a good opportunity to sort of re-engage with your current base. And maybe you're turning your ad spend down on new prospecting a lot, right? Mm-hmm. You're running a little bit leaner. You might see a revenue drop, but hopefully you can make up for that by leaning into your existing customer base.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially because each of these categories, maybe let's just define 3 of these, right? So I think on one side, you've got the essentials, and they've got no problem at all with customer acquisition. I think they've got no supply chain issues.
They're just trying to get as much product as possible.
And they have to worry about delivery.
They're fine.
I mean, wasn't Amazon hiring like 100,000 people or something like ridiculous like that? It's so those guys are another level. And then I think you've got the guys in the middle, like what you said, the new essentials. Maybe people selling things are not exactly aligned with what people want, but maybe something similar. And then you've got the segments like travel, which it's just dried up completely. And I think we're going to have to talk about different strategies for each of these. But maybe let's just focus on that middle one for a second there. I'm totally with you on them going back to the existing customers, right? Have you seen, is there anything else that in terms of the thought process? Like, so for instance, I've seen examples of brands that have had to reinvent themselves a little bit. So maybe come up with sort of different products than what they normally do just to make ends meet and keep that cash flow going. Is that something which, you guys have looked at all, or, something you'd suggest to others?
Totally. We haven't looked at it specifically. And fortunately, I think we're sort of in a category that is not an essential, but it's a growing, I think the 3 brands that I'm a co-founder on, they're all sort of beauty adjacent. Mm-hmm. And luckily, as far as we've seen, those are growing categories right now. And I think when you look at like your current customer base, and then when you look at that middle bucket you're talking about, there is an opportunity to acquire new customers. Because of what's happened, when you look at like these 3 buckets, you've got the bucket of people that are in essentials they can't keep up. They just need more. They need inventory as quick as they can, right? They're doing fine. Then you've got the other end of the spectrum, travel, so entertainment, movie studios, theaters, TV. They literally can't. They're sort of paralyzed right now. Like movies are paralyzed, right? They can't spend it all. So you've got probably 30% of the market that had to pull their ad spend from Facebook or YouTube or Google or any of the larger platforms, right? So then what's happened is, and it's super unfortunate because there's obviously massive industries that are stuck and out of business right now.
Yeah.
Right, but from an e-com perspective, just from a business perspective, what that's done is it's dropped the CPM on Facebook, and so it's you're getting a lot more bang for your buck. And when you compound that with all of the people that are staying at home and consuming content, there's this over supply right now of ad inventory on these platforms. And so you should be leaning heavy into prospecting if you can back into the numbers and make it work. But at least I think from what we've seen and the other founders I've talked to in the e-com space, for the ones that really have their like funnel down when it comes to digital marketing, it's going, fortunately really well right now for them.
Right. And I mean, one of the questions I think I've seen quite a lot from entrepreneurs in this situation is being a little bit, I don't want to say afraid, but hesitant, let's say, of maybe appearing to be too opportunistic in a time of like pain, right? So, like I think it's very, you've seen a lot of people on the other side who are selling, COVID-19 cures. So let's leave those guys alone. We're talking about like real businesses, right? Yeah. So like, what would you advise someone like that who's like, you know what, I see the opportunity, but I don't want to be, a quote unquote, I can't think of a nice enough word to put here, but I don't want to be an ass about it. Like I want to be empathetic, let's say, but
Totally.
clearly there is an opportunity. So how would you think about that? Like, what would you tell them?
Sure. Well, so I think one, the reality is anyone that's in business, whether it's an e-com business, you're a restaurant, you're a retail store, this affects anyone. It's the reality of business. You have to continue running a business, right? And so I don't think based on what's going on in the world, you can just stop your business unless you're physically forced to shut it down. Like, unfortunately, restaurants and retailers have had to, but otherwise you have to continue running a business. That's just reality. But then on the other side of things, to your point, which I think is incredibly important, is again, like any brand that I'm involved with, I feel like we have a real relationship with our audience and our consumer base. Right. And the first thought again was like with our employees, like making sure they're okay, they're safe. And the same thought goes to our brands. And we have had to adjust the marketing, the marketing tone and message, because we do care about our consumers and we first and foremost want to make sure they're okay. And then I think it was a lot of like asking questions on what type of content they wanted to see, right? Instead of just assuming what we wanted to show them, we really involved them in the conversation on what content they wanted to see, right? And right. I think it's interesting. Like, I think people are looking to brands right now for a little bit of, they're looking for an escape, right? And they're looking for someone who they can speak to about what's going on. And so we've sort of adapted our marketing message based on the feedback we've heard from our consumers. And that's sort of how we've navigated that.
Okay. I mean, I think one of the issues which I've seen with this thing about being empathetic is that a lot of companies have responded with emails and messages that really don't mean anything to the customer. I mean, I've got a ton of messages that say, we really care about you, we're taking care of our employees, blah, 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 blah. But, I'm scanning this and I'm like, okay, like, how does this apply to me at all? Yeah. And I guess that's one of the things which you're mentioning here, right? Being really empathetic to your customer and knowing them. So whatever messages you've got should really solve an actual problem which they've got, rather than you just saying, hey, we care.
So a perfect example of that, like the hair brand I'm a co-founder of, it's called Insert Name Here. We did an Instagram live yesterday where what we found was a lot of our audience is primarily female, 20 to 40, right? And like a lot of people that are stuck at home, they're used to going out, exercising, working out. Everyone's been trying to just figure out, like, in this new normal, like how to take care of your mental and physical health, right? And what we found by like polling a lot of people is like they were super interested in, maybe picking up yoga or like just different workout classes online and like recommendations or Spotify playlist recommendations. And so we hosted, we brought like a yoga influencer on yesterday and hosted like a 1 hour live yoga on IG Live. And I think that's a good example of it, I agree with you. We didn't want to just send one of those messages, you know, that all of these companies are sending, that we've seen a million of these emails now.
Yeah.
It was more, again, like we listened to our audience, and then based on what we heard they needed help with, we're trying to accommodate that and bring that to the table as best we can. Right.
Right. And then, so you've covered the aspect of reaching out to existing customers, and I think, you know, that's a really good way. You really got creative there. You stayed true to your message, and you solved the problem which your customers are having. And I guess you could sort of extend that thinking a little bit to thinking about new customer acquisition too, right? So hopefully you got more people that didn't know you to come onto that yoga web, what's it called, a webcast. And you maybe like, are you also, maybe let's talk a little bit about ads and sort of customer outreach. Have you guys changed those a little bit as well in terms of tone?
Those have changed a little bit. And again, I'll speak to some of our brands as it's definitely category specific, right? But so let's take the eyelash. We have a magnetic eyelash brand called Glamnetic. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, what's happened is that, you know, again, unfortunately, a lot of women go to salons to get lash extensions, right? Okay. Well, all of those salons are shut down. And so there's sort of been a trend to e-com shopping for eyelashes because without getting into too much detail on how eyelashes work, these lash extensions fall out over time. And women need to, if they want to buy eyelashes again, they need a place to go. And so what's happened in this particular category, particularly in beauty, is as a lot of the places that they go to, whether that be a hair salon or a lash extension bar or a nail, a place to go get their nails, a nail salon, mm-hmm. because they can't go there right now, there's been a massive shift to DIY at home. And not just like the buying side of DIY, which they obviously need to buy now online. That's the only place to buy, but it's opening up an entire new group of consumers who are genuinely interested in how to do it at home and the education around that. So I'd say like there's been a little bit more, content around DIY and just like education on how to do a lot of these things at home. And then that's been like the major shift in the last month, at least in this particular category.
And it's sort of, I don't want to use the word perfect, but content is one of those things that takes a lot of time, right? You can't just you could probably just get some piece of content out, but it probably won't do very well. And right. Given the fact that you're sort of in this pandemic situation and you probably have a little bit more free time than you used to because maybe you've got your commute down and things like that, this sounds right. like the perfect kind of thing to get your hands dirty with, so to speak, right? Which would hopefully grow your business and like give you something fruitful to do with your time.
Totally. And I think for brands too, like one tip I would give them is that there's, we haven't talked too much about the influencer side yet, but mm-hmm. If they do have a network of micro influencers that they work with, now is a really great time to reach out to them and, gift them product and just like send them some of their new products that they have, because they have more time to create content than ever right now. And there's, an extremely captive audience online at this particular moment in time. And so that's something I would tell, an e-com brand to probably do, is like really dig deep into their network of micro influencers that they work with and, lean on them for content creation.
Let's jump into that. I did have like a couple of things I wanted to ask you, but I think with influencers, that's a topic which I have to admit I don't know too much about, and I'd love to understand more. So let's say we've got a brand who've never worked with influencers. It seems like with the amount of time people are spending home, content really is the way to go. And you really want to connect with people who've got similar issues to problems that you can solve. What should someone do? Like, how would they get started with finding the appropriate influencer and like building a successful relationship with them?
Sure. So without, going to buy some like costly, platform and paying fees to like one of those platforms to, source influencers, the sort of down and dirty way to do it is just to go to brands that you aspire to be and go look at their tagged photos on Instagram. And if there's, I wouldn't necessarily go to a competitor, but maybe like a company that's in the same category, but maybe they're in, if you're in, men's grooming, maybe go to a men's apparel brand and look at the influencers that tag them in photos, right? Mm-hmm. And just shoot them a DM and say, hey, we wanted to reach out. We saw your profile, love the aesthetic, would love to send you some product. And you really need the key is reaching out to a lot of them, right? Like if you reach out to a couple, you really have to invest. You have to invest time into building out a micro influencer strategy, but it will pay off. But it does take time of manual outreach to connect with these influencers that you think have a good aesthetic that represent your brand, and the two sides sort of match up.
How would you advise somebody thinking about getting into using influencers? How should they think about it?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the largest challenges e-com brands face is the amount of content that you have to pump out today. And it's just, if you as a brand are trying to produce all of that content yourself, it's really, really tough, right? And so I think like and particularly now with having a consumer at home that's consuming more content than ever, mm-hmm. as a brand, it makes sense to pump out more content than ever. But I would say I really recommend one strategy would be reaching out to micro influencers who you feel fit the aesthetic of your brand and feel like there's a lot of synergies between the two sides. And, I'd say sort of stick to the range of like 25,000 to 100,000 followers on Instagram. Okay. Anyone more than 100,000, it's probably going to, a lot of times turn into sort of a paid partnership deal, which is a whole, sort of other strategy we can talk about when it comes to influencers. But it's really just reaching out to these influencers through DM, letting them know that you really love their aesthetic, their vibe, that you really feel like it fits the two vibes of the brand and the influencer match. And you'd love to gift them some product in exchange for creating some content. And it's really a numbers game, right? Like you have to reach out to 100 or 200 micro influencers in order to get, 15 or 20 that will actually end up creating content for you. And so it does, I would say if someone's just jumping into it and trying to, message a couple influencers, I'd say you're probably not going to see the results you want. But if you have someone on your team that can really dedicate a few hours a day to outreach to influencers and cultivating the relationships, right? Mm-hmm. It is something that will pay off, particularly from a content perspective.
I guess one of the things I've always wondered is for someone who's new to this, right? People always say, don't look at how many followers, look at engagement. Is there anything else that comes to mind, someone who's really not new, or rather someone who is new? Are there any other sort of guidelines you look at to judge if, hey, is this influencer going to help?
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a few. So generally, I'll look at, the follower count, but secondly, and more importantly, I'll look at the engagement rate, right? Mm-hmm. So if they've got 100,000 followers, but they're only getting 500 likes a photo, that's probably someone we wouldn't want to partner with.
Right.
On the other end, if they've got 100,000 and they've got 10,000 likes, great engagement. But then what I do is I actually go into the comments and look at like actually commenting on the post, because you want to make sure that unfortunately, there are some bad actors out there who buy followers and buy comments, and buy likes. So yeah, it's a little bit of, it's kind of become instinctual at this point, who's a real influencer and who's not a real influencer. But sort of the basics are qualify via like, look at their following, look at their engagement, make sure they have a great engagement rate, go look at the comments. If you're not sure on the comments, then what I do is if you're like 50-50, then I'll go and look at who follows them and see if there's a lot of bot accounts that follow them, right? And if there's tons of bots, then, it might not be the person that you want to work with. But then separately, it comes down to like really looking their feed, looking at their stories, looking at all the content they're putting out. and making sure that aligns with your brand and your brand messaging, right? So it's like a two-part equation. It's like, okay, qualify them from, do they have real influence? Are they real, right?
Right.
Followed by, are they the right fit for your particular brand? And that process should only take a minute or so per influencer. It's really quick, right? Like once you get quick at it, you can kind of tell really, really quickly. But I'd say that's sort of how to pre-qualify if they're a good fit or not.
And do you look at different social media channels for different brands? I mean, I know IG is really big right now, right? But again, I'm kind of new to this, but would you say that maybe some other brands should be looking at Twitter, for instance, and some other brands should be looking at Pinterest? Is that a factor as well?
It is. I think it depends on how deep your bench is in terms of how many people you have working on your team to sort of build out that process. So I'd say if it's a new brand that maybe has like one part-time person that's working on it, it really depends on the platform you're trying to build. And I'd probably say still start with Instagram, because there is a compounding effect where it's also helping you build followers on what is now probably still the most important platform from a brand perspective. So there's other benefits outside of just getting the influencers to create content for you. You're looking to build your Instagram, base. But like for us, for example, on each of our brands, we have dedicated teams now that do outreach, and we do it cross-platform, right? So we do a lot on TikTok, we do Instagram, we do YouTube reviews, starting to dabble in Pinterest a little bit. And I'd say it's pretty still heavily weighted Instagram with YouTube, Snap, and essentially all the other platforms following. But you need a team for that, right? Like it can't just be one person. So I'd say if you had to start one place, build your Instagram strategy out, and then once you've sort of conquered that, move on from there, would be my advice.
And do you find that using influencers will also help you, I guess, make your own Instagram feed look better? I guess like sometimes, someone's really new to this. They might not even be on Instagram yet. So, if I'm going to go and sign on Instagram and I'm totally new, I guess there's this period of time where I have to build some sort of street cred, right? Like get some basic followers going on. Totally. So would you say like they've got to do that first before they get to the influencers helping them really accelerate things, or just don't worry about it, go for it immediately?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with, if you're a new brand, and we started, obviously all of our accounts started at 0, right? And so
somewhere.
Insert name here is about to hit 200,000, I think, this week. And we've got a pretty highly engaged audience. And so we had to build that literally from scratch. And so it started with having you kind of have to create a great vibe and aesthetic for the brand. Like luckily we did have some influencer relationships we could pull in. And so you kind of have to make the feed aesthetically represent what your brand vibe is about, right? And then you just have to start small. And, that could be influencers that have 10,000 followers, right? They're really micro, like nano influencers.
Right.
And you have to start somewhere. And it's a numbers game again, where you have to reach out to a lot of them to get a few of them to connect and actually create content with you and for your brand, and bring them in as like a long-term content creator of your brand. So you have to start somewhere, and in the beginning, right?
Yeah. I mean, the sense I'm getting from you is that you have to approach influencer marketing as it's like a human to human interaction. Like you have to, like, they have to actually like you. If they don't, then they're not going to.
Totally. You cannot automate the process. These brands that try to send these non-perfect blasts out.
Right.
It's like the COVID email that you were talking about that every brand in the world sends, right? That's not personalized. That just feels like everyone got it, right? I think it goes a long way if you're a brand and you're DMing an influencer and you're taking the time to look at something on their feed. Maybe they have like a dog that they love, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm a big dog lover too. I think that love all the content you put out with your dog. It establishes a connection, because you have to remember an influencer is a person. And as much as I think sometimes, particularly marketers who are really great at the paid side, because that's like a numbers game, right? You're like scaling, like when you're running paid ads, right? You're a lot of that becomes automated, and there obviously is a manual process to it, but it's automated and has infinite scale being automated as you increase your spends. It's not like that on the influencer side. And I think a lot of really good paid marketers try to apply the same principles to the influencer side of things. And that, you can't automate it. That doesn't translate.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to the conversation we were having about the new normal, there's sort of this conversation that goes around that this whole thing is just accelerating the trends that were going to happen anyway. And we've been talking about content, we've talked about influencer marketing. What it really comes down to is authenticity, right? Like it's like you can't really scale and just blast everybody with the same message anymore. It's like really about connecting at a human level. And I guess
Totally.
this is probably we're going to see even more of this. I know it's a new normal, and even when things go back to how it was, it probably won't go right back to that. It's probably going to be even more of this authenticity content. Would you agree?
I completely agree. And I think the brands that will win out long-term are brands that aren't selling just a product. They're building a community of people that they have a two-way relationship with.
Right.
So the same thing that applies to influencers applies to the consumer that you're speaking with, right? If you try to automate a process of how you talk to consumers, yes, when you send emails, there's, automated messages. Like there's obviously an aspect of that. But
like the orders ready, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, you can't automate everything, and nor should you want to. I personally wouldn't have fun building a brand that's just like automated
Right.
and a machine.
Yeah.
I love the aspect of getting to see the reaction of consumers when they get their product and they like it, and giving us their feedback, whether that's good feedback or bad feedback. We'll take it, right? And we want to improve on the bad feedback.
Yeah.
If we have any. Luckily, it's mostly good, but like I think it's just. I think the brands that will win out are the ones that aren't just selling a product, they're selling a community. And then the other big piece of this is that once you pass that initial stage of brand building, brands now in e-com have to be really good at everything. So you have to be great at paid, you have to be great at influencer marketing, you have to be tight on emails, text message marketing, community building. You kind of have to get your entire funnel down, because there's not one way. There's not one channel that builds the brand. Even if someone's great at paid, if they don't build a community, they're going to tap out eventually, right? Like then they're just a drop shipper. They're pushing a brand that's not a brand, right?
And it's such a big risk, because the person you're paying money to get ads and give you traffic, they could change the algorithm like that, and you're screwed, just like what happened on Facebook.
Totally. But then also, I'm always like, what? There's no fun in that. That's not like, for me, I want to build
I like that.
It's like a long-lasting brand that, again, you have like a relationship. And if you're just like running ads to make quick money, I think that game passed a long time ago. And I think, for all these drop shippers, they kind of got pushed out of the market, and they might make a resurgence now a little bit because the CPMs are down. Right. We'll see. But it's not a long-term, business.
This is such a deep topic, so I'm trying to restrain myself for going into this, because automation, this whole thing about how everyone's losing jobs and stuff with automation, it's like it seems like, again, I'm trying really hard not to go into it, but I guess the takeaway there is, to succeed, I think, yes, automate all the stuff that you don't need to spend too much time on, because as you said, you need to focus on so many things right now. But spend as much time as you can on all the parts about the brand that lets you be human, that lets you communicate with your voice, because that ultimately is what's going to make you successful.
Totally. And then leverage the sort of automation and the data that's being collected behind the scenes. That I wouldn't take away I don't want to I don't want to say that like automation and data is not, it's incredibly important and it serves a really valuable tool, but you should use it the right way to think through how to better segment your customers, or how to, how to use it to get critical feedback that you can drive improvements to your brand and business through. And so I think they just need to run in parallel. And I think the brands that will succeed do a good job of balancing the two together.
Right. I mean, we were testing something recently where, whenever you install our app, we used to send you this welcome email. And it was this very nice HTML designed thing. And I've been testing cutting all of that out and just making a plain text like message from me.
Totally.
And that's been so much better. Like it's kind of like changing the, like every time people see this really beautifully designed thing, they think automation. All right.
Totally. Yeah. And they want to hear from a person, right? Like I think, you know, honestly, on all the brands the 3 brands I'm a founder on, each of my co-founders are pretty, you know, pretty active on social. Sharon and Jordan, who are my 2 co-founders on insert name here, they were the first 2 employees at ColourPop Cosmetics, and they are super active in talking about the brand on social, and our audience really connects with them. Same with Anne McFerrin, who's my co-founder on Glamnetic. She is, if you look on that feed and on the stories, she's on there every day giving company updates, right? And then with Wakeheart, the 2 Dolan, it's a little different, and they're like huge macro influencers, right? But they're, you know, really sort of bringing their audience into the building of the brand. And so I think it's just important for brands or companies to like have someone speaking to them as opposed to just the company speaking to them, you know?
So I guess you could say this is a really good opportunity to reevaluate how you're speaking to your customers and your brand, and try to bring it back in line with what we've been talking about, because this is where the future is heading. So you might as well get on that train right now if you're not.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I think if there's one positive that can come out of this, because there's obviously, again,
a ton of negatives. Yeah.
I mean, look, there's a ton of things that are going on, and again, like health is the most important for everyone. But I think the one positive would be long-term, if people were to look back, there were probably critical decisions and assessment made during this time, and reevaluation of what people were doing in their businesses, that for business that actually took the time to do critical thinking, assess the situation, and then be decisive on the changes they made, I think it could transform those businesses going forward, and they're going to come out of it stronger than ever if they, you know, really dive deep and go through that process.
Right. You know, I heard somebody say something like, it's that, yes, we're in this big problem and there's probably going to be a recession, but it's not like somebody just went and set fire to all the money. Like the money is still there. It's just that people's priorities have shifted. The demand is still there, just different things. So it's really just sort of being back to basics entrepreneur thing, which is like yeah, you've got your community. They may have different problems to solve. If you can be authentic and reach out to them, you can figure out how you can provide value. And that's really that's what you're doing as an entrepreneur, right?
Totally. And by the way, for these VC-backed businesses, look, there's going to be some that go out of business, unfortunately. But for the ones that either are well capitalized enough to weather the storm, or have really made quick, decisive decisions, right? It's the best thing for them in that that they're going to learn how to operate a real e-com business without blowing tons of money, which again doesn't make any real sense. Why you would need to blow all this money to build an e-com business? And so I think for them, it's, you know, hopefully they'll be able to adjust their business to run an e-com business or brand the way I think it should be run, which is not by losing tons of money. That's not a business.
No, I'm totally with you. And I think literally every entrepreneur right now, regardless of how well capitalized they are thinking about cash flow. And I think everyone's trimming fat right now. So,
and I think it's a little, you know, for some of these VC-backed brands, it's a little unfortunate because I think you have the investors at times pushing them into growth mode, saying grow, 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 right?
Yeah.
And to get to the next round, right, and get the next valuation. And it's so tough because they had influential outside people who are invested in their business wanting them to grow, right?
Yeah.
And you know, and you kind of get caught in the growth game, but it wasn't responsible growth.
And when you're in the growth game, you basically have to do all the things we talked about that you shouldn't do, where you have to start automating, you have to start sending a million emails, you have to start doing all of these things because you can't scale, you know, growing through the ways we were talking about.
I feel like a weird thing happens psychologically too, where you start to self-justify the amount you're paying to acquire customers.
Sure.
And you're like, yeah, I'll pay 150 to acquire this customer because the LTV is going to be this, but it's not backed in any, it's one big assumption that you've sort of self-checked and just said, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to acquire all these customers for that amount of money. And it's going to pay off.
Right.
But it's one big assumption that is a tough gamble to make.
I guess what happens is like, we've been talking about things like new normal. You could be spending 100 or something stupidly high. But then 3 weeks into that, that's your baseline now. So if you're
Right.
going to optimize, maybe you should only be spending 10, but if you've been spending a 150 and you get a 30% reduction on that, you're going to be happy about it when you're
Right.
not really anywhere near where you should be. So
Right.
I guess you get into this cycle and then you're already in it and it's very hard to get out.
Well, and I think they're luckily, even though it's specific to each business when it comes to each, look, some businesses may be able to back in and say, wow, we acquired for 150. That's a crazy high acquisition. We lost on the first customer, but we see the LTV, right? But I think if you look at the ecosystem and you look at all these brands that are now, there's enough key learnings out there that all of these brands that were early in e-com that went to hyper growth mode, the LTV numbers didn't really back out like they thought they would, right? So it depends on each individual business, but you have enough examples of brands that went and spent a lot of money to acquire way too much and it didn't necessarily back out.
I think it comes down to how sound your long-term game is, right? I mean, if you go into this thinking, look, I'll acquire at 150, but I know it needs to be 10, and here's how I'm going to get that number to 10. That's very different from saying, okay, I'm just going to keep acquiring at 150.
Totally, but it's still one big assumption if they can. I don't know. Me personally, I believe in responsible growth, and we're going to grow as quickly as we can, but not irresponsibly.
I think that's going to be a big theme of pretty much like this post, because responsible growth, I think, is one of those big topics like that hits topics like even climate change, right? Like this whole idea that everyone can keep growing at the same percentage year over year, it doesn't make any sense. So, but again, I think that's another door I don't really want to open right now. But listen, if we we've talked a lot about what businesses should be doing in terms of cash flow and then marketing and all the like very practical tips that you've given on how they can grow responsibly, keyword responsibly. Let's talk about that long-term situation, because e-commerce right now is changing so quickly, right? A couple of examples would be a whole segment of the population that probably never thought of buying online are now buying online.
Yeah.
Right. And they do that 1, 2, 3 times. Next thing you know, even when the quarantine is out, people might think, what, this is kind of convenient. I'm just going to keep doing it. Totally. And then, on the other side, forget about consumers, but on businesses, you mentioned all these businesses like restaurants and things like that. They're also being forced to adapt to get online because that's kind of the only way there. So you've got these very significant changes going on right now. Have you guys thought a little bit about like what that landscape is going to look like 6 months from now, and like, are you planning for it at all?
Yeah, I mean, look, I wish I could predict what would happen. I've definitely thought about it a lot. I mean, I think that through the end of this year, I think that the e-com space, again, for the categories that are doing well now, I think will continue to be strong. The one big like what if, I think, as we move into this longer term is just what's going to happen to consumer spending. Like, I don't know if it's going to cancel. Like, I don't know if the Facebook CPM dropping will be canceled out by less consumers, buying because they're just not, unfortunately, they're not in jobs, right? Like, I think,
that's a big
I think that's the biggest concern, like the macro concern is just like, what effect is this going to have on the economy long term, particularly for a lot of these industries that are completely being reshaped. And again, I think long term e-com is going to be fine. It's going to thrive. It's going to move a lot of people into buying online even more so than they are now. But I'm really, like, I think cities are going to be reshaped, you know, like I don't know what LA is going to look like. Like our favorite restaurants might not be there. Right. Or, I think there's certain industries like live events, man, I'm really concerned for, because I don't see,
Sports.
they moved Coachella to October. I don't see any world in which, any world right now, based on what I'm like looking at, that Coachella stays in October, because I can't imagine putting 150,000 people in one place
I
if there's
know.
still cases out in the wild. And sports, music, live events, it's just interesting to see like how each, like on music, right, the big artists are going to be fine. It's these like up and coming
Okay.
artists who depend on their touring business that unfortunately can't tour, you know? So I think events is going to continue to be really tough. I think e-com will continue to grow, but the big what if is what happens to the overall consumer spending.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. It, so it sounds like the right thing to do is to really just be nimble. Get
oh
your company prepared to make these quick jumps and decisions quickly, because it's kind of stupid to try to predict too much because we
yeah,
don't know.
right. We can have all these assumptions, but honestly, like, who knows what's going to happen next week, right? Like we're taking it week by week, and trying to think long term about the business, still moving forward with like growth plans, expansion plans, being smart about the way we're thinking about it,
Mhm.
obviously. But you don't want to, again, is going back to the beginning of the conversation. You don't want to be paralyzed, you know, and not make any decisions.
Mhm.
But you know, look, you do need to take these things into account and also know that you can't predict the future.
Now more so than ever, right?
Right?
Yeah, but I think that's really, really solid feedback, or rather practical advice, because you don't want to be so cocky as that you know exactly where this is going, because you don't. So
Yeah,
try to,
never.
yeah. So you really want to just kind of like hope for the best and plan for the worst, right?
Right, right. Well, and I think it's just, I don't know, my personal take on life is like, I'm like an optimistic realist.
Okay.
So like, I try to dream big, but then I try to stay grounded in like reality of how to execute it and like, you know, make it, uh, like actually have a plan in place and how to get there. Right.
Right.
Like, you know, some people just live in dreamland. They live in
Uh-huh.
dreamland and they're not grounded in any sense of reality. And then some people live so far in reality that they can't
Depressing.
get past the barrier of seeing what's ahead 12 months or 24 months out. So I
Right.
don't know. For me, again, it's different for everyone. What works for me is trying to be an optimistic realist in the situation and striking a healthy balance of both.
So it's interesting you say that, because my co-founder and I are very different. So I'm like really positive and optimistic usually, and she can
Yeah.
be quite sort of, let's say, realistic. And I think
Right.
that's why our dynamic works well, because when you have a discussion, at least if you respect each other.
Yeah.
So it's cool that you've got both of those characters in yourself.
Yeah, it's great, and I think it's great you guys have that too, because it's like an amazing dynamic where you got one person pushing forward, you got the other person saying, "Hey, should we like pull back a little bit?" And then you find a healthy balance. I think a big thing for me and like why I think like that is because I'm funding everything.
Mm, that's
I
very
see
different. Yeah.
where, man, I look at that money tight. Like
Mm,
I don't want to lose money, right?
yeah.
It's my money. So it's hard earned money that I'm putting into these brands. And so it makes me like, don't get me wrong. I'm dreaming big. I see where these brands are going, the direction they're going in, the velocity they're growing at. And I'm really excited, and there's a lot of really good things going on, but I just think you have to like stay realistic,
Mm.
to, so when situations like Corona hit, right, you're prepared, right?
Exactly. So, so I think we've had a really good conversation so far. I'm just trying to like summarize everything really quickly. Like, what would you say, if someone's listening in so far, um, what are the top three things you'd summarize with saying, hey, like these are the things you should really do right now to be prepared?
Yeah, and again, categories, it might be business specific, category specific. If you haven't already done a real assessment of your business, I would go ahead and do that. Go ahead and do that very quickly and really assess like how you can run as lean as possible, how you can be smart about the way that you're spending on softwares, on marketing. Just try to run lean and back into a place where you see the business. Where you see the business, where it's ideally not losing a lot of money as you're starting to grow it, because there's no VCs that are going to be plowing money into.
And you'll be spending insane equity on it if you do.
Right, and then I'd say after you do that, I'd say like then it goes into like the communication aspect with your customers, right, and like. How do you like really step back and think about the relationship you have with your customers? Like for me, like the way I learn about our customers is not only talking to them, but I just look at like what they're speaking about or what they're like, even on our comments, like what are they commenting about, what they're interested in, asking questions to your customers. I think it's like, it's okay for a brand to ask customers, feedback. Sure. Right. And I'd say like, that's sort of like the next step. And I'd say like the third piece is like what we just talked about, like try to be like an optimistic realist about things. Know that you can't predict the future. Things are going week to week now. So sort of like every week, take a step back and reassess what you did the last week and see what worked and what didn't work, and double down on the things that worked and tighten up on the things that didn't. And, just go from there. It's,
Yeah, and I'm going to add one more thing. I think everyone should look into this influencer marketing idea, because I think it's very relevant. It's been relevant for a long time, not to get me wrong, but I feel like it's going to be even more important because you're really trying to, and I really like what you said about being authentic and growing responsibly.
Totally. Yeah, I think the influencer marketing thing is something that universally, whether now or later, everyone should be thinking about how it's an element of marketing that goes into the overall marketing mix. Mm-hmm. And I think for brands to stand out, again, they have to do lots of different things from a marketing perspective, right? And I'd say my last point is like for anyone starting a company right, now, or maybe they're like in the early stages, don't get caught up in that fundraising game where you think you need a ton of money. There's a difference between if someone needs to raise 50 or 100K because they need the money to build a business. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying like, don't get caught up in the, dreamland vision of we're going to go acquire all these customers for X amount and backing into this crazy LTV. Like I think I'm proof with my co-founders and I and all these brands, we didn't need crazy amounts of money to grow these brands. For inventory, yes, but not for operations. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, that would be like my other take on everything, just grow responsibly.
I love it. I think I'm going to title this conversation Grow Responsibly. I think we've said that. Kevin, it's been awesome having you on this, man. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure people, I don't know if you're open to it, but if people want to get in touch with you, talk more about influencer marketing, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple ways. Just can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I post some stuff on Instagram a lot around around business and e-com. It's just my handle's Kevin G. So pretty simple, Kevin G. And then you can follow our brands. One is at insert name here. The eyelash brand is at Glamnetic. And then our fragrance and scent brand is at Wakeheart. So if you want to follow along, and you can kind of see some of the things we're doing on the e-com side as well.
Awesome. Kevin, great to have you with us.
Yeah, great to meet, and thanks for doing this, and be safe.
Yes, be safe. Wear your face masks.
Yeah. All right, take care.
Take care. You're still here, which means you definitely enjoyed that conversation. This is a special COVID-19 e-commerce miniseries to help small business merchants out there get prepared. We're doing a lot more of these, so be the first to know whenever there's a new episode. Just follow DataCue, that's DATACUE on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Stay safe out there, everybody. Till next time, this is Shahram.